So folks, I'm sure for those people who watch movies, I don't watch much movies anymore, but people who watch movies know that it is actually very, very hard to make a movie from a great book. And it's almost never that the book, the movie matches it. There are times though, where people can make movies which actually match it, but it's a tremendous achievement. In sometimes the movie is better, but that requires somebody of artistic ability, which is equal to the artistic ability of the person who wrote the book, who takes in everything, reintegrates it in their own mind, using their own medium, and expresses it. So it is very hard to do. It is very rare to find it. So Tony, can I make one suggestion? Could you talk about the movie as a whole and what you think of the movie? And then we don't need to kind of compare it,
okay,
part by part. Just the overall picture of the movie would be something, because there are many people who have kind of watched the movie, want to take it as a whole.
Right, and they already know what it's lacking. So
yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, I apologize for being redundant.
No problem.
First of all, my opinion, I think it was cast very well, given that it's the paperback version of the book, the condensed version of the book. A young Patricia Neal, who is slim and beautiful and vulnerable looking, I thought she did a great job. I thought Gary Cooper, who, yeah, his character in the movie is kind of cut and dried. He's kind of stiff in the movie, but I think he carries it off, given that you're not going to get a lot of depth. I noticed a couple of times there are scenes where you see his hands, and his hands are huge compared to the other people there. He's holding Dominique and his hands are huge. And you think, yeah, that's a worker. That's the guy that was in the quarries. So I think he pulls it off. I think Kent Smith did a fantastic job as Keating. Raymond Massey as Gail Wynant, I was the only one that had doubt about. And I think not because of his acting, I think he actually pulls it off, but because he looks older than he should, in my opinion. But I think that was, on retrospect, I think that is one way they could make him unappealing to Dominique, because in the book, she marries him to punish herself, and she admits to him it's a loveless marriage. So a shorthand way of doing it, make it age inappropriate. So in a way, it was fascinating that way. The other thing I want to mention is that one of the key scenes in the book, and of course in the movie, is the quote unquote rape scene. And we can think of it. This is why I need to listen to your discussion about Dominique. But it's kind of an ethical rape, because she wants it. She sets him up. She wants it to happen. In fact, she wants to be dominated by him, knowing that nobody can dominate him. That's what she wants. And boy, I think they pull it off. And when I look at it objectively, I say, this is kind of silly. But when I'm in the movie and it's happening, I'll go, yeah, of course, that, she's setting him up to do that. So there's that. And then a number of things that are left out of the book, left out from the book, that she has to condense are, I'm just amazed that she was able to do it and pull it off. A lot of this has to do with Toohey's influence and how he comes to dominate the paper. And all the intricacies are left out, but you still believe that he's able to do it. And to go with what Maritza had said last week, of course, we know in the movie that Wynant finishes by actually committing suicide, which again was a condensation of all the things that happened to destroy the banner which in reality was destroying Wynant. In fact, in the book, he has other concerns throughout the world, but in the movie, he just has the banner. So it's another condensation. So I thought that was brilliant. Some of the brilliance, the movie always gets rated kind of like a 6. And I think if you go to the movie without having read the book, you can see why that is. But if you go to the movie having read the book, I think you're just amazed at what she was able to do. Rob should now comment, or whoever you like. Okay, that's all I have to say for now.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. All right, now I'm going to keep it open for anybody who wants to comment. I'm going to give chance for the panelists to go first. Anybody who would like to go first? Rob, are you ready to go? Or
I'm ready, but I can wait if somebody else wants to jump in.
Let's go with Maritza, followed by Rob. Maritza.
Okay, so full disclosure, I'm not a big movie person in general. I watched this book for you guys, and I want my 2 hours back. This movie seemed to suffer almost from an overly heavy hand of Ayn Rand's in it. It was very clear that she kind of was holding a fire to the writers of this play, because there seemed to have been a checklist of things that she said they must be in here and they must be intact. Many things seemed to be in there solely because she demanded it, and it didn't seem to flow very well to me. But overall, I just felt that the novel was lackluster. It just didn't have the depth. If I had not read the book, nothing about this movie would have been memorable. And I think that's a travesty and a horrible disgrace to the novel that is The Fountainhead. The character, they just weren't, and maybe it's what Tony said, maybe it's just a matter of there was too much condensing that happened for it to have been robust. Maybe that's what it is, but I really felt that there were too many underdeveloped plots. Like, so I know Tui's background story, but somebody who hasn't read the book only sees him very peripherally, and that's just not enough for you to get a grand scope of what it is he was about, and the caution that he brings for us to view in our lives. Like it just, I don't know, it was a failure as a drama, because it really was rather boring. It was a failure as a romance, because there wasn't not enough emotion came through in anybody, really. I will say that the one scene that I really thought was done well was the end. I really liked when the actress, and I don't know anybody's name. I know Tony just blurted out all these names, and I'm guessing they're probably well-known actors, but I didn't recognize any of them. You guys said Gary Cooper, and I was like, God, I think I know that name. That's who that was. No clue. I will say, so at the end there, she's looking up, and I just thought it was really well done with the wind, and you could see behind her, they showed the city, fading away, and then just being the open sky, it showed the water. I thought that scene was very well done. And her face, she just had this look of pure joy as she was looking up. And that part, I felt that was the one scene that just, it had a level of depth. And maybe not having read the book, you got the feeling that in the mind of this actress or this person, she had overcome something grand to get to that point. Unfortunately, I don't feel that the rest of the movie gave you enough to know what she had overcome was, because if you have not read the book, you're just left with a picture of Dominique as this frivolous person who's engaged to one person and then marries this other person and then just leaves him. And there's no, it just doesn't, I don't know. I was underwhelmed.
Thank you. And maybe afterwards, we can talk about what a good movie looks like, maybe. If you have
Don't
time.
ask me.
No, not you. But there are people here. I promise you, there are people here who can ask the question. What's a good movie, and why does it not match that? So next up is going to be Rob, Rohit, and then Joia.
Okay.
Rob.
I'm unmuted.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'm here to explain why Tony's wrong. No, actually, what I want to say is, I actually like the fact that we had Tony and then Maritza, because this is the gamut of reactions you typically get for the movie.
One or the other.
And I'm not going to discount Tony, because I know enough people who, encountered Ayn Rand through The Fountainhead and got a lot out of it, and who loved the movie and had a big impact on their lives. So far be it for me to say, oh no, this didn't happen to you, because it did happen to you, right? You did have this reaction. It made you, it made you get the message and feel what you were supposed to feel for the movie. So it works for some people. I think you're in the minority. I think it works for like 10% of the people, maybe. And I think that, so my view, I'm the one who does, I'm one of the people who thinks it doesn't work. And let's see, the problem is,
he put on his glasses.
The actors, the director, the music, the sets, and the script. Other than that, it's fine. What about the buildings? That's the sets. So I want to talk, the ones that I think are interesting are the director and the script. So I'll just briefly talk about the others. I had a little trouble with, Gary Cooper's almost there in some ways. I think he's a little too old, because, Howard Roark is supposed to be a young guy starting out, and Gary Cooper was, a little long in the tooth for that. But I think his biggest problem is that the rap against Gary Cooper is his performance is kind of wooden and unemotional. I think he didn't really understand the issues that were going on and what it was, especially in the speech. There's like in the eyes there, he's just not quite personally getting what he's saying. But what struck me this time looking at it again is he's actually emotional in the wrong way, which is he repeatedly shows annoyance or anger. And that's sort of like, to me, that was like not getting the concept of what Howard Roark is about, because Howard Roark is supposed to have this kind of serenity, right? He's not supposed to be angry at the world. He's not supposed to be annoyed by Peter Keating. He's supposed to be sort of, he just, he sort of deals with it. It's not, Peter Keating doesn't upset him in one way or another. He's not affected that much by other people. Right. And personally, I find it interesting that, because we have such different views of the movie, I find it interesting that Tony was sort of on the edge about Raymond Massey as Gail Wynand. I thought he was the best actor in the group. I thought, when he came on, I was like, there's a guy who really gets the character. So I thought Raymond Massey was the one who was hitting on all cylinders. I thought their Tui was wrong, because their Tui is he's too robust looking, and he barks out his words instead of saying them in that slow, deep, rich, insinuating. He has to be more Mephistophelian. He has to be more, he is corrupting you. He's sort of corrupt. He's corrupting you in a charming way. So he has to be more oily and more insidious. Whereas there too, he's just barking everything out and yet shouting at you all the time. So I just thought that the casting was, Patricia Neal was actually better than I expected as Dominique. Sherri may not agree with me on that, but she was better than I expected as Dominique. But she also got there was a little bit of that, just a touch here and there of that sort of his 1950s hysterical woman kind of performance, which was like, yeah.
You gotta bite your hand.
You gotta bite your And it was like a style
Giant
of the 1950s. This is 1949. We're going to the 50s. This is sort of a style of acting in the 50s that was common that does not really mesh with Dominique Wynand or Dominique Franken. But
Dominique Keaton.
So the music I thought was also something that interfered with it for me, because the music was so over the top. It was like the music was dialing the emotion up to 120% constantly all the time throughout the movie. And I think it was trying to compensate for the fact that, if they were doing the rest of the film right, you shouldn't need the music at all. You should be getting that emotion. You should be getting that drama out of the action and the dialogue. And I thought there was like this disconnect where it's like they were trying to put all the drama and all the emotion into the music, pumping it at you 120%, instead of letting it come out of the story. And then the sets, and I think there were things like Winans' apartment was like way too gaudy. We don't get to see him as a man of taste in his private life. But the biggest problem with the sets is the drawings of Howard Roark's buildings. I'm going to let Sherri talk about that for a second.
Well, because one of the things that happens in this story in the book is we hear about international style and how it's different than what it is that Howard Roark is designing. And unfortunately, the buildings that were shown as Howard Roark's buildings in the movie are that international style, which is really, it takes the modernism in a different direction than the point that Howard Roark is making in his work. But I do have to say, excellent kudos to the first scene when we see Howard Roark in the boardroom with the bank, and they show the utter silliness of adding these weird parts onto the building. That is comically funny, and that part is really one of my favorite parts of the season, because it just shows you exactly how tacked on these things really were. And I think that scene is really good. But
plus, they got Winans' office right.
Winans' office I liked. It has this grand luxury to it. His apartment seemed too much like what I expected Peter Keating's apartment to be like. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So, but to me.
And the bigger problem I have with some of the so-called Howard Roark designs is some of them weren't actually they just weren't very good.
Well, some of them actually don't quite function either, which is kind of a big problem for me. And this is something that I don't expect normal people to deal with. But when I watched the Brady Bunch as a kid, my biggest problem was that the building that they show on the outside could not have possibly been the building that they show on the inside,
the house
of the Brady Bunch house. And that was the case for like every movie I see, the buildings, I catch them every time. The funniest thing is sometimes I'll say to Rob, "Oh, I know where they got that light." but so the buildings are a big, they're the part I can't really watch it because of that. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go on to the other stuff. So I was talking about the direction and the script, because I think those are the really interesting part of things. So I think part of the problem with the film is I think the director was King Vidor, and I think he just fundamentally did not get the story. He did not himself understand it. So his job is to make sure everybody's translating the story and making it real to the viewer. And I think he couldn't do it himself. So I think that's part of the problem. And part of the problem here is that King Vidor is well known. He actually became famous for a movie he made in 1928 called The Crowd. All right, so let me give you, I'm just going to read you the Wikipedia summary of the story. John Sims loses his father when he's 12. At 21, he sets out for New York City, where he is sure he will become somebody important, just as his father had always believed. Another boat passenger tells him he will have to be good in order to stand out from the crowd. John gets a job as one of many office workers of the Atlas Insurance Company. Fellow employee Birch takes him to a double date to Coney Island. John is so smitten with Mary, he proposes to her at the end of the date. She accepts. Bert predicts the marriage will last a year or two. A Christmas Eve dinner in their tiny apartment with Mary's mother and two brothers, and with whom John is not on friendly terms, ends badly. John goes to Bert's to get some liquor. A young woman there throws herself at him, complimenting him on his looks, and starts to dance with him. John returns home very late and very drunk. Mary's family has gone home, but she tells him that they do not understand him. They exchange Christmas gifts, and John compliments her, but yells at her when she does something trivial. In April, they quarrel and Mary threatens to leave and is shocked and hurt by John's apathy when he does not try to stop her. The couple reconciles when Mary tells John that she is pregnant. She gives birth to a son. Over the next 5 years, the couple have a daughter and an $8 raise, but Mary is dissatisfied with John's lack of advancement. And in light of John's big talk about his prospects. Finally, John wins $500 for an advertising slogan and buys presents for his family. When he and Mary urge their children to rush home to see their gifts, their daughter is killed by a truck.
Oh, God.
John is so overcome with grief, he cannot function at work. When reprimanded, he quits. John gets other jobs, but cannot hold on to any of them. Mary's brother reluctantly offered him a position, but he's too proud to accept what he deems a charity job. In a fit of rage, Mary slaps him. John goes for a walk, contemplates suicide, but his son goes with him. The child's unconditional love for him makes him rethink his situation, and he changes his mind. John gets work as a sandwich board carrier and returns home, his optimism renewed, only to find Mary about to leave. She steps out of the house, but no further. She loves John too much to abandon him. Here's how it ends. The reconciled family attends a vaudeville comedy show with the final shot showing them overcome with laughter and lost in the crowded audience of laughing people. All right, so it's a lot to take in here, but this movie that King Vidor is famous for almost sounds like, I expect somebody to be a line in there where somebody says, and why not a muskrat? It almost sounds like one of the parodies that Ayn Rand has of the culture of the 1920s and 30s that she's up against. It's this idea of this guy who has ambitions to become important and to become somebody special and to rise above the crowd. But the whole life you have here is just totally boring, conventional folks next door. They have a date at Coney Island. It's all, just totally.
You've never taken me on a date to Coney Island.
I never, we don't live in New York.
Okay.
But anyway, the point is that, everything's sort of conventional folks next door, plain regular folks type of stuff. And it ends with them being lost in the crowd and finding comfort in being lost in the crowd. So instead of rising above the crowd, they merge into it. So it's almost like this guy's coming from, and this is the big movie, he's King Vidor, the Meet King Vidor famous. So it almost strikes me as like, this is a guy coming from the exact opposite of Ayn Rand's perspective. And then being said, okay, go direct The Fountainhead. 20 years later, he's supposed to go direct The Fountainhead. And I think that's, so that to me, I think that comes out through all these different aspects of the movie, that where he needs to understand what's going on in the story, the director just doesn't really understand it and isn't able to translate it into concrete terms. Now, I want to go to the other issue about the script, though, because the thing I noticed about the script, reading it this time, so this is Ayn Rand's script. So she did it and she kept all the words in she wanted to have in. But I think she made a mistake with it, which is that she compresses everything that's early in the novel. It all gets compressed down to like the first half hour, the first 20 minutes or so. A lot of the early development of the characters gets way compressed down. And then a lot of the stuff that happens later, like the stuff with Gail Wyman, it all gets brought in much, much earlier. So she compresses everything at the beginning to have more of the stuff at the end, which I think is a mistake because you don't have the time of getting to know the characters, of really getting to understand who they are and where they're coming from, and have the more subtle characterization, and instead of that subtle characterization, like the first conversation that we see that Rourke has with Keating, where Keating is asking him for advice, and they have this back and forth, and it's clear they have two different world views, but it comes out subtly and slowly from the dialogue. In place of that, what Ayn Rand kept was a lot more of the speechifying and a lot more of the people stating philosophical conclusions. So I think, I point out that I think Ayn Rand's speeches are too long, but on the other hand, she doesn't really give you a lot of the philosophical stuff until you're way in the fourth part of the book, right? And you've had 400 or 500 pages of previous material and development of the characters. And then she brings the big, heavy ideas in. And it's a lot more natural there because the heavy ideas, the big ideas come in after you've had this long period of time getting to know the characters. In the movie, I think they're just brought in, boom, right up front, right in the script, without the slower development and the slower pacing of getting to know the characters. And I think that's a bit of the problem, is it comes across a little bit as too much speechifying and not enough character development and not enough the slow pacing of the plot that would build up naturally. Let's see. And now I think some of that could have been, I think some of that could have been fixed if you had, if the director were more on the ball, because the thing is, like with Tui, we don't have time. We're obviously in a movie. We're not going to have time for his backstory or for explaining, what he did when he was like 5 years old with Johnny Stokes, all that stuff. That's obviously not going to make it into the movie. Although actually, I would want to say, I think the best way to adapt an Ayn Rand novel, especially this one, or especially the Atlas Shrugged, because they're so big and there's so much plot, and you have to lose so much if you condense them down. I think the best way to do it would be a mini series, like season 1, 8 1-hour episodes. We do the first part of The Fountainhead, and then season 2 is the second part. Just do it out like that. That would be much better. But if you're going to condense it down, and you're not going to be able to have, here's the backstory and also Tui, then you need to have so much has to be communicated by the way he's dressed, by the way he stands, by his voice, by the way his office looks. You have to communicate so much non-verbally, right, in order to fill in all of that background and characterization that you don't have time to develop in the story. And I think that's where the director fell down, that he wasn't able to say, okay, he wasn't able to think through how should Tui talk? How should he sit? How should he hold his hands? What kind of office should he have? He doesn't think all that stuff through to help you.
Evanik's got it.
Yeah. Oh,
Tui's
Evanik says
he's
a snake oil salesman. Yes,
exactly. He's got to come across that way.
But so the thing is, the disappointment for me on the Fountainhead movie is the big opportunity of taking a movie and making a movie out of the book, is that it gives you the opportunity to make everything concrete. Take all the characters and make them fully real in every detail. Because when Ayn Rand's writing, and any work in any novel, you get a few evocative descriptions, you get a few details here and there, and it's left to you, the reader, to fill in this whole mental picture of who these characters are and how they walk and how they talk and all that sort of thing. And that's probably why a lot of us get disappointed by seeing a movie generally, because we have such a clear image of what the characters are. And if the director's image doesn't match ours, we get disappointed. But, for people who, I think there are some people who grapple with these novels, it's like, I can't really get Howard Rourke as a real person. I can't really see what he would actually, it doesn't seem real to me. Making a movie is a great opportunity for the director to say, okay, I will make it real. I'll have him walking and talking and fully concretized, and making everything concrete for readers who struggle to do so themselves. Or even better, for people who already have their own conception. Sometimes I see a movie of a book and the director has a different view, and it brings something new out of this book that I hadn't realized was there, something creative and different that makes me sit up and take notice. But I think that's why the big problem I have is I think King Vidor just wasn't able to do that. So that's why I think this does come across as feeling like the cliff notes of the novel, not like a dramatization of the novel, but like the cliff notes of the novel. But like I said, on the other hand, I've met this string of people over the years, like Tony, who got a lot out of that. So I'm not, if it's just the cliff notes, that's okay, because some people still are able to get a lot out of that and see in it more than I think I see.
Are you done? Because I have something else to add.
Yeah, sure, I'm done.
To me, I kind of see it like a postcard of the Grand Canyon. It's only this big. It's only 3 by 5. And if you've been to the Grand Canyon, you've experienced the depth and the breadth and the hugeness of it, then that postcard is a reminder of that for you. But if you've never seen the Grand Canyon and all you've seen is the postcard, then you don't ever have a sense of what really is behind it. And I get this because the Fountainhead is always shown in architecture schools every single year, and it's shown as a comedy. And that's what many architecture students see of the Fountainhead. They don't understand what the book is about. It's just a it's literally a comedy to them. It was very painful for someone like me to sit and watch them laugh at the movie. But I think for Tony and many other people, it's that postcard, it's the reminder, that instant reaction that puts in, concretization like artwork is supposed to do, that instant boom, it's all there in one piece. But for me, it's I have to have the Grand Canyon.
Wonderful. Next up is Joia, followed by Rohit. Joia.
So when I was watching the movie this time, I was reflecting on how I would agree that I have a mixed reaction to this movie, and it's mostly negative. But I've always thought it was interesting. The other big movie that's come out about Ayn Rand's works, the one that at least came out in her lifetime, even though she didn't have any influence on it, was the movie of We the Living. And while I would say that I definitely like the book of We the Living much more than the movie, I like the movie of We the Living much more than I like the movie of The Fountainhead. So this time watching the movie of The Fountainhead, just asking myself why, like, what is it that's missing in this movie that I like so much better about the We the Living movie? And I realized that for me, simultaneously, there were two problems going on. And some of this, I think, even gets to what Rob has been saying, and Sherri and Maritza, but I'm gonna give some props to Tony too, because I do see some positives in the movie as well. But the big issue I realized I had with the movie was that on the one hand, I thought it was over dramatic. And on the other hand, I thought it was not dramatic enough. And I'll say even the over dramatic part, I kind of liked even a little bit better. And I wish that the movie had gone in that direction. Whereas the way the movie was not dramatic enough was, I think, the big flaw in the movie, and the part that I really wish needed to be changed. So I want to talk about that part first. And sadly, I think that was even the part that Ayn Rand, as the scriptwriter, had the most control over. And I wish she had made different choices about the script, and that it would have made it a completely different movie. But the thing that really struck me watching this time, and someone's even mentioned in the comments this phrase about showing versus telling. And this is a principle that we learn applies to all narrative. It applies to books and novels. It applies to plays and movies. But this movie, I realized, was almost all show and no tell, especially in terms of the characters' motivations. It seemed that every single scene, every single line of dialogue was the character telling you what their motivation was, and not enough of actually showing what that would be. And it was really curious to me, because I noticed that so many of those lines were lines straight out of the book. They were these great lines that in the book condense the motivations of the characters in conceptual terms that I think adds to your experience when you're reading the book, because you've seen everything that's going on sort of underneath the hood of all these different characters. And then Ayn Rand gives you this line that gives it this great conceptual clarity. But in the movie, what happens is you just get line, and none of the showing. So for example, there's one point where people were talking about Tui, and so Tui has that line where he says, I play the stock market of souls, and I play short, or something. I'm paraphrasing, but you probably remember the line, which is a really great and powerful line about who's the character of Tui. But the problem is he says that, but we never see any of that, and precisely like as Rob was saying, because we never get sort of the backstory of his childhood. We never see what he's doing with his cadre of all the crazy artists and such. We just get the line of him saying the motivation, and similarly, it's all the characters just kind of telling you, this is my motivation. This is what I'm doing. This is what I think, and never any of the showing. And I understand that part of that was even the difficulty for Ayn Rand of trying to have to condense everything. But I almost wish that she had made different choices. The biggest one was, if I feel like if she was going to decide to really even focus on the Rourke, Winand, Dominique story, I wish we would have gotten the backflash to the Winand's childhood. To me, that's such a pivotal thing that we have to see to understand who Winand is, and the fact that he had this creator potential that he's then going to betray as an adult and what he does with the banner. But we never even get that sense of who Wynand is in that key way, because that's all part of the backstory that never gets dramatized in the story. So that was the way in which I just felt the novel just never made the choices to show you things. And interestingly to me, my favorite scene in the whole movie is the scene that I learned was actually the scene that apparently they filmed first, which is the scene where Rourke and Dominique first encounter each other, where he's working the granite quarry. And I realized the whole reason I like that scene is because it's a scene where they actually show you. There's no dialogue, and you have that scene where it's Dominique kind of walking along the ridge, and then she sees Rourke with the tools, and they have that eye contact. And apparently there's a drama about the making of the film, that Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal even had some kind of affair that came out after this movie. So maybe there's even that kind of real sexual tension in the way that they're interacting with each other. But just even that way that scene is filmed, we're getting the showing. We're getting the way that we're seeing how these characters are responding to each other. Whereas like the rest of the style of the movie would have just been like, you would have expected them to say like, oh, I think you look strong, and like no strong person I've ever seen before. And, Rourke would have just said something, obvious back to her. So to me, that was the part of the movie that I found almost most unforgivable. And especially in terms of thinking about, Shrikant asked the question about, what makes a movie good. And to me, that is precisely what I want to see in a movie. I look always for the cinematography and what are the choices that are being made visually in what is given to you. And that's exactly what I thought, unfortunately, was lacking with this movie. Then on the other hand, there was a way in which the movie was over dramatized. And this was, perhaps the way that Rob was suggesting, that the music is so dramatic. And, Patricia Neal has those facial expressions that come out of that melodramatic style of acting. It's almost like a silent movie. And I've heard people say this before, and I almost agree that I wish with this particular movie, they had actually made it a silent film. Especially even with the black and white. One of the things that I actually liked about the movie, which I thought was this more dramatic, and I would have even been happier if it went in this direction. With the black and white, sometimes I thought there were some really great effects visually with the play of like the dark shadows, versus the light. Like when you have a black and white movie, I think, that's something you can even do visually, that adds that real sense of drama. And I almost wish that they had filmed it as a silent movie, because I think if they had made that decision, then it would have like forced them in the direction to have to think about how do we show things more, and not have to rely so much on the dialogue. So every time I watch this movie, I always wish that they would have kept those elements. And I hear what Sherri is saying too, that it veers into melodrama, and certainly in our own era, contemporary people view melodrama as comedy because we just see it as over the top. But stylistically, I feel that's almost even closer to what The Fountainhead is, because it is such a stylized presentation. I feel that if the movie had leaned in that direction to really be stylized, to be this silent movie, to have a lot of violent contrast between the blacks and the whites and the grays and the black and white film, that it would have been even it would have been an interesting interpretation on The Fountainhead, and one that I think would have drawn out something really important about what the story is all about. And then I realized I had, so that was sort of my big thing about the film, was like the either over dramatic or undramatic. Then I also realized I had some issues with some of the character presentations. And so starting with Gary Cooper. And Gary Cooper was Ayn Rand's choice. And I can see the things that she liked about him. And for people who like the movie, I can see why there are these elements of Gary Cooper, certainly the way that he is tall and gaunt, which that was Ayn Rand's personal preference and how she envisioned Rourke. So just even that look of him. And he has that intransigence and that strength. In the movie, she really wanted to emphasize the integrity of the character. And I think that comes out. He comes out as being very strong and unmovable. And, he's someone who can fight against the world. But my issue with that is that in my understanding of who Howard Rourke is, that's always essentially a secondary element of his character. When I think of who is Howard Rourke, the first line of the book, Howard Rourke laughed. And we have that vision of Howard Rourke out there in nature and so excited about what he can create from the bounty of what nature offers. And that to me is the essence of work, this ecstasy of the creator. And it really struck me watching the film this time when we finally get to the big speech that Gary Cooper gives, where Ayn Rand does focus a lot of attention on who is the creator. But we never see in the film or from Gary Cooper's presentation that joy and ecstasy and thrill of being a creator. We never see Howard Work laughs. And to me, that is almost the most unforgivable thing about the movie and the presentation of this character. Because as far as I'm concerned, the Fountainhead story is the story of Howard Work, and that is who Howard Work is. And then, of course, it is the fact that because he has this integrity and he's born in a culture that doesn't understand him, he's going to go, head to head with everyone in the culture, and he's going to have that strength that's going to allow him to emerge triumphant. So, of course, that's an important element of his character. But to me, that's always still a secondary part of the character. I always think that, if Howard Work had been born where he came of age in Silicon Valley, the way we knew it at the turn of, the 2000s, where a culture of innovation was really celebrated and triumphed, that he could still have been Howard Work, and that would have been more acceptable in that cultural milieu. Whereas if you have just the person who has the integrity and the fighting against the world, but not the joy of the creator, then you're just missing out who Howard Work is. So to me, that was the most frustrating part about the whole movie. Patricia Neal was my favorite presentation in the movie. I can see how she definitely maybe veers into the over dramatic, but again, I almost wish that the movie would have made that choice and had it go that way. So hers was my favorite presentation. I'm going to disagree with Rob and say that Raymond Massey was the character I found and the actor I found least convincing in his portrayal of Winant. And watching it this time, I actually wished that they had switched the casting of Toohey and Winant, because Toohey, I thought, came out as someone who seemed very strong. He seemed to have that kind of internal drive where you could see this is someone who could have grown up in Hell's Kitchen and had the energy that it would take to create the banner out of nothing. Whereas from Raymond Massey, I never got that from that character. I could see the Raymond Massey playing the Toohey role much better, and seeing the actor who played Toohey, bringing more to that particular characterization. So overall, I'm always hopeful that there's going to be someone else who decides to do this movie again in the future. That there's been talks recently, like Zack Snyder, who I guess most recently did the Batman movie, had been in talks about maybe wanting to do the Fountainhead. And I think there are so many interesting choices that could be made about the Fountainhead. I definitely agree with Rob's point that doing a mini series would be a great way to get into depth with all these characters. But even if you took the limits and the restrictions of, let's say, just 2 hours, I think there are a lot of really interesting choices that could be made with this film. But just to get back to my main point, that I think what you would really want to focus on is everything that could be shown. And as I said, I still almost wish that it would be a movie that had minimal dialogue and a lot of showing. That's what I have to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joia. Next up is going to be Rohit, followed by Rupali, Evanik, and Ginny. Rohit, what do you think?
I think that both Rob and Joia's analysis is just amazing. I think I've watched the movie like twice or thrice now. I've always found it very choppy. So, you switch suddenly, and then, in the book, the point where Toohey meets Roark is way inside the book. There's a lot of development that has happened. But in the movie, it's like in the first 5 minutes where Toohey asks him a question, tell me what you think about me. And there's really no context. So I think there was a lot of opportunity to build the characters which was missed. Obviously, I feel that there are many ways it could be done. It could be done as a mini series, or even if you say, okay, we're going to give 10 minutes to each character and have a character development happening in those 10 minutes. That would have been awesome. and because of that, you really don't understand I mean, obviously we do because we've read the book, but you don't really understand the intentions or the motivations of any of these characters. Casting wise, I feel I'm in Rob's boat. I feel that Gail Vinan's casting was the best. I felt Gary Cooper was probably a little older for the role, especially when he goes to the principal's office. I mean, that's completely felt that was completely disjointed. And I think the other thing is that both Rupali and I have had we had the chance of actually seeing the miniseries, the Pakistani miniseries before this, and that kind of has much more of the character development. And the key barometer that I have is a barometer called time to sleep. So that's the time Rupali takes to sleep when a movie is boring. And that time to sleep was, I don't know, it was 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and she was gone. So I think it's an enjoyable movie if you've read the book, right? It's kind of, hey, let me get a quick revision. Let me get because all the high points all the highlights in the book are covered, especially the speech at the end. So I think, you can watch it and get something out of it if you've read it. But if you haven't, it's kind of a tall order. That's my perspective.
Thank you, Rohit. Next up is Rupali about the first 7 minutes of the movie.
Okay, so yeah, I'll start with this. That yes, I fell asleep in the first 5 movies, and I'll tell you first 5 minutes of the movie, and I'll tell you why. Because the first scene of Howard Roark, right, when you first meet him in the book, is this happy, joyful character who's experiencing this freedom. And in the book, you see Gary Cooper from the back in the first few scenes, and then you see his face, and my first thought was, boy, this is an old man. And much like Maritza, I watch movies, but I don't remember who's who. And so the first impression was he's an old man. And so I think I fell asleep right after that. But I had seen the movie many years before, completely without falling asleep. So I know how the movie went. It reminded me of the time when our son, he was in elementary school, and he was reading the Harry Potter series, and he really enjoyed the Harry Potter series. And then we decided to watch the first movie, and he was distraught. He was so upset because he said, that's not how I imagined Voldemort. And that's what happened to me in the Fountainhead movie. That's not how I imagined the characters to be. I think the closest character was probably that of Dominique's, which kind of was more in tune with the book. And I've mentioned Teesra Kinara, which is a Pakistani serial made in the early 80s. And the main actor of the movie, Rahat Azmi, he was an older man by that time when he made the movie, but the serial. But he got the essence of Howard Roark. You see him in the rain, and you see how he has empathy, which I did not see in Gary Cooper at all. I felt like Gary Cooper was arrogant. And I think that's the misconception about the Fountainhead characters is, and I don't know if that's partially because of the movie, that he comes across as an arrogant person, whereas really Howard Roark has empathy. You can see that with his interactions with all of the characters. And yes, he's staying true to his principles, but he's not arrogant. And in the Pakistani serial, you can actually see how Rahat Azmi is a compassionate human being, and that he is making the choices and he's staying true to his values, but he's not arrogant, he's not mean. And the thing about Urdu, and probably Jyoti will have something to say about this, it's just a very polite language. So even if they are disagreeing in Urdu, they are disagreeing very politely. And there is, that layer of civilized conversation in there, which I felt was missing in the movie. Which you do see in the book. You see that everybody is behaving in a civilized manner in the book, and they may disagree. The other part of Dominique's character, I think and I'm just comparing this now to the Pakistani serial compared to the book, it's much more well developed. Like, you really understand that, who Dominique is. And I can understand the frustration of most Westerners about Dominique's character now that we've heard and read the book and heard everyone's opinions. But I feel that in the Pakistani serial, they were able to keep the sensibilities of the culture, as well as show the evolving times in India and Pakistan back in the 80s, where it was possible for women to have a voice and make choices and be independent and have the ability to say, I want this and this is how I'm going to get it. So I think they did a very good job about that. So those were some things. Rohit did talk about the transitions being very choppy. Now, the final thing I want to say is that I don't know, Tony, if you had read the book first or watched the movie first, but if for someone like somebody who has not read the book, but has a sense of life that resonates with Ayn Rand's philosophy, they can read into those dialogues and they can understand why this movie makes sense to them, right? Whereas people who don't have that sense of life, as Sherri said, it's a comedy to them, because even if they meet a real character in their life, they're not going to understand the philosophy, I think. So, hey, if a postcard is impressive and makes a difference, I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Especially if it ends up, making you go and take a trip to Grand Canyon. I just wanted to say, I want to follow up with a comment that Joia made briefly. We the Living is actually a great movie. By my standards, it's a fantastic movie. It was made during the fascist regime in Italy, and it was commissioned as a propaganda against the Russians, and it was playing in theaters, and nobody actually wants to watch the propaganda movies, but somehow people flock to watch the movie. And it ran for a while until the people who were trying to push it realized that this was against individual versus collective, and people were coming to it because they were talking about Italy. It was talking about, and so it's a incredible movie, and it's a great example of what can be done with a book. So that's the only Ayn Rand movie that I've seen, which stands by itself. You don't need to actually read the book in order to see its power. So if anybody has any comments about We the Living, if they like it or don't like it, you can put it in the chat. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Ginny, and then Joia. Evanique.
Yeah, I watched this movie and I did not like it. I agree with Rob. Everything. I thought it was so over dramatized. Like, it wasn't natural. It was like everyone was overacting and trying to bring the drama to the line. And it just came off to me, as fake and phony. I felt like what everybody else said, like, it was choppy. I felt like there were certain lines that were just inserted in just to get the line in, but it didn't fit. And it not only, like, I could see you taking creative license with certain things. Like there's certain times that you do because you're trying to truncate a whole book into a 2-hour movie, but it's almost like you don't get the impact of those lines unless you read the book. And then if you've read the book, it feels like the movie just doesn't do it justice. Like the scene at Tui and Howard Rourke, and I agree with a lot of people that said, I thought Gary Cooper was way too old to play Howard Rourke. Howard Rourke was supposed to be in his 20s, and Gary Cooper was at least in his 40s, like late 40s. So I was like, or at least that's the way he looks. So I'm like, he's too old to play this part. But I felt like the way Gary Cooper delivered the line, I don't think of you. In the book, it's just kind of more matter of fact. Like, it's supposed to be like an in passing thing. Like, I don't think of you. And he's like, he overplays it. And it's like he's trying to elicit a response from Tui. And again, I felt like with the line, that line, he doesn't care if he gets a response from Tui in the book. He's just kind of like telling him, hey, I don't think about you. So I really thought that was bad. I did not like Patrice. I did not like Patrice O'Neill's characterization of Dominique. I felt like it lacked depth. I felt like I think Dominique wasn't very well developed in the script. I think there were some parts that were redeeming about her, but I felt like, again, it just lacked character development. Like, we didn't see how Dominique got to the end. Even with Howard Rourke, I was like, you don't get that character development. Like, it was just the whole movie was just weird. I felt like they left out certain key players like Katie and they left out Katie. They left out Louise Keating. Like, Louise Keating is what made Peter Keating Peter Keating. And we don't get to see that at all. And she's like a big character. I felt like Peter Keating, it felt like he almost, like, you felt like Peter Keating got what he deserved in the movie, but it wasn't good in that, like, knowing Peter Keating from the book, how he got to that point, whereas in the movie it doesn't tell you. All you see is Peter Keating having a few lines here or there, and it's like you don't even understand kind of like the love-hate relationship between Keating and Rourke, which I think was a big part of it. And yeah, so overall I just did not like this movie. And I mean, I'm telling you, even with Gail Wyand, I was like, they did not develop him at all. Like, I felt like you didn't see why. Like, it was almost like, okay, one day the banners open and now everybody has left. But I'm like, you don't get the real reason why. You just kind of see headlines and you don't understand. I felt like Tui is like an evil person. And you just kind of get the feeling like, oh, Tui's manipulative in the movie. Like, you don't get why. And I think that the key literal scene between Tui and Wyand is that Tui thinks he's won, and they leave it in the movie as he's won. And like, Gail Wyand shoots herself. So of course Tui won, right? So you're thinking Tui took over the banner, or, but what Gail Wyand does, which is just very, I think I like that part of the book, is he lets Tui comes in and he lets Tui sits down and he starts typing, and then all of a sudden everything shuts down behind him. And he's like, the banner is closed. It almost feels like just as Tui thinks he's won in the book, he hasn't won. Like, the whole paper shut down. That didn't come across at all. I think I did not like that the simple fact that they had Gail Wyand shoot himself after his interaction with Howard Rourke. I was like, it just, like, if it you didn't see, I mean, it just didn't make sense to me at all. And the end part was really just like put the nail in the coffin for me in this movie, where Howard Work is standing at the top of the building like Superman, and Dominique's just like looking up. I'm like, why are you making Dominique so weak? Like, I felt like they weakened the character of Dominique, and I'm like, I did not see her strength come through this movie at all. She just seemed like this damsel in distress in the movie, which is like Rob was saying, there's a lot of 50 characteristics of women. So you could definitely see that. But she just played this damsel in distress the whole time. And you're like, that's not Dominique Franklin. That's not who she is. As if anything, Dominique's character in the book fights against that narrative. And that's why she does a lot of the things she does, is because she's fighting against the narrative of being a damsel in distress. She wants to be quite the opposite. And even when she's falling in love with work, a part of her really doesn't do that. So I'm gonna stop because I know Iris wants to say more.
Sure.
But,
Let me thank you, Evany. So firstly, folks, I want to apologize and never do meetups on things we don't like, because there is just so many of those things and those are really not worth talking about. So I apologize, and I'm going to make up for it for a reason by talking about one thing. Is we should do a meetup, a full meetup on movie as a medium, applying everything that we have learned from Romantic Manifesto to it, because Romantic Manifesto doesn't explicitly talk at length about movies. And I think we can do a fantastic job of that. So at some point, I would like to do that. Okay, so let me have, first, let me go to the panelist who have things to share. I think Sherri is eager to say something. Sherri, go ahead, followed by Joia and then Jeannie. Sherri.
And Iris. Iris has got
and Iris. Unfortunately, I have to go around like 7:30 or so, but we've got 20 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, and I just had a really quick thing. Both Rob and I wanted to mention this. Both Shrikant and Joia mentioned that in the book We the Living, we can see that an Ayn Rand book can be successfully made into a film. They also wanted to mention that it's also very possible to see a screenplay that Ayn Rand wrote that successfully translates into a fantastic film, and that's Love Letters. So if you've
1946, 45, 46.
Is it Joseph Cotton?
Joseph Cotton and Jennifer Jones.
So if you haven't
really
seen
good.
this, and we're not telling you any part of the story, because it's best if you come in without knowing and let the film unfold.
She was actually adapting somebody else's book, but she added so much to the material that she got, and it's a really good movie.
So that's one of the cases where the movie's better than the book.
Yes, one of the few.
So that's all.
Okay.
And we're going to have to take off in a second here too. So it was really lovely seeing you all.
Yes.
Well, excuse me. The reason I've been online is to compliment you, Sherri and Rob, most of all. And I have not come to this meeting until this one, actually, and then maybe one other. And I just wanted to compliment everyone in this room, and to just see that you watch these films and, of course, read the book with such critical eye. I was just absolutely amazed. And for example, the film, my ex-husband, who's an architect, told me when we first met, one of his best and favorite movie was Fountainhead, and I just bought right into it. And he never, looked at the film with a critical eye like you, Sherri and Rob, and many of you in this room. I'm just totally amazed and awed by how critically you have received this film. Just wanted to let you know that. And that was my main comment, just to compliment you all.
Sure. Jeannie, you are an actress, right?
Yes, I'm an actress. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your comment coming from you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joia and then Iris. Joia.
just have something quick to say about the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
I saw a talk by Shoshana Milgram once who had done research on some of the drafts of the screenplay. And apparently in Ayn Rand's first vision of the movie, she wanted to start with the scene with the Manhattan Bank, which I think actually, like as Sherri is pointing out, was one of the best dramatized scenes. But apparently this was something in Hollywood where they had this rule where when you were adapting a book, you had to start with the way the book started. Otherwise, like readers wouldn't recognize the book or something like that. So that was not an Ayn Rand choice, but I think, and apparently that version too, when she started with the Manhattan Bank, that version included the Hopton Stoddard trial, which I think would have dramatized, like, just even showing the contrast between the two trials. So I almost wish that was the movie that we got.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Next up, so I will go to Iris in a minute. I want to ask, so Rob and Sherri, I do want to, let's see if have Rob and Sherri left. Give me a second. Okay, so we will talk about what to do next, maybe sometime in summer, either Atlas or another Louis Sullivan book, the great, the system of architectural ornaments. So I'll talk to them and we'll figure it out. All right, Iris, go ahead.
I had no idea this was going to happen. I have about 20 minutes worth of stuff that I think everyone should know about.
Okay, go ahead.
At the beginning, when you were talking about the film, I had to rework my mind because yesterday, Zack Snyder announced he is going to do the film of Fountainhead.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. And it is a passion project for him. He has just one company that he owns that he created himself, and the name of the company is Stone Quarry. So he really understands the film. He started out doing horror films. He did the 300, which is the Battle of Thermopylae, 1480 BC or 400 BC. And he really cares about these things. I expect his version will probably start with Wynand fighting. Snyder is very big into fights. We're going to get lots of bloody fights, but anyway. I have information on how the film got written. Let's see. Just an aside, something I never understood until I finished reading the big book. Rand, in We the Living, the character, the woman, Kira, thought that when you looked at someone, you knew everything about them. You could look at their face and understand everything. And what Rand says there is she thought that way because she was very young. What I didn't realize till I read this book and got lots of information about Rand's notes before she wrote Fountainhead is that that is the world she created in Fountainhead. And so that's what's gone on between Rourke and Dagny, and also between Rourke and Wynand. Everything is understood. I didn't really realize how seriously Rand took that. Okay, scripts. There were two other scripts. It's very short. Thames Williamson thought Dominique should remain with Wynand because he had become a deserving husband. He wanted Rourke to use cute little pet names for Dominique. He thought in the end Rourke should be seen as a monster, but he didn't think he was fundamentally changing the novel, and he wanted the style to be naturalistic. Another script was written by Harriet Frank Jr. She didn't want Rourke to be heroic. He should be subject to disappointments and anger like any other man. Rourke should explain at the trial that he never could have set fire to Cortlandt. She added Marxism and she wanted the style to be social realism. So that's what was going on at the studio before Rand started writing. So that's their context. In Rand's version, she said the studio didn't understand the book and didn't know what might antagonize her readers. So that's what they're writing to. They're trying to get all of these people who read the book to come see the movie. And she said that was her greatest protection because they had no idea how it should be written. She had to please the Hayes office. This is the self-censorship that was set up by the industry. Their Catholic expert told her that the speech sounded too materialistic. She told him that it advocated reason, and he said that might offend religious people. And she said, how can that be? Thomas Aquinas is the great champion of reason. He knew nothing about Aquinas except that he's an official Catholic saint. So he agreed to everything she wrote. They kept asking questions, and to get the approval of the Hayes office, she had to keep adding things to the speech. So it got expanded to 6.5 minutes. Let's see, Patricia Neal did come to the junto, which I moderated. She spoke for, I don't know, 3-4 hours. And yes, during the filming, she and Cooper were having an affair, a very hot affair, I gather. Okay, I saw the film the first time. I read the book in 57. I guess I saw the film about then too. This is the first time I've seen it in decades. And in watching, I know every word of the novel so well, having read it so many times the last several weeks. And I thought of it as being like a poem. And I mentioned that to my best friend who saw it as many years ago as I did. And she said, yes, she always thought of it as being like a poem. Oh, just little thing. I always thought of, I can't remember his name, Guy Franken, as being an American who was putting on airs because he went to a French school. And so he was always putting little French words into things he was talking about. Just something I didn't have time to research. So if you can understand it, there's a essay in this book about getting the book published. And one of the things is that Doubleday, to entice Rand, told her that really conservatives, they published Trotsky, who is a communist, but he's a kind of communist that some communists don't think is communist enough. Okay, and then let me see if I can do this quickly. In the afterword, Peikoff had something that was in Rand's journal. This is, is this showing up? This is Rand's idea of the ugliest building in New York. It's the Daily News building, mixture of international style, Art Deco, Art Moderne. It's 42nd and 2nd, 10-minute walk from here. And it's done by Raymond Hood. Also interesting, this is Rand's idea of the most beautiful building in New York, McGraw-Hill building. And it is also same architect, Raymond Hood. And it's at 42nd Street between 8th and 9th, which is Hell's Kitchen. The facade is made of blue-green ricotta ceramic tile panels, alternating with green metal framed windows. And then another building by Raymond Hood that Rand liked is Rockefeller Center. And at the bottom here, you see the garden. And, in fact, we live at ground level. That's what people know of it. It's beautiful waterfalls and fountains and plantings that they change all the time. And, you kind of see the top of the building from a distance, but most people don't see it that way. And see if I can add a few more things. I really enjoyed Sherri focusing on color. It's the kind of thing I normally do. It's fun to have someone else do it. And I never thought of Rourke as holding back on his emotions. I mean, he was so passionate about everything he cared about. But another thing I didn't get a chance to research, his father was a steel puddler. And I think that's really a skill that kind of edges into science. Very interesting to know about. He's just not a regular worker. I think that's most of it. Oh, as an objectivist, all of the people I knew who got interested in it at the same time I did were trying to change themselves to become objectivists. I was always judging the philosophy. Did it match the life I had? Can I do a little thing on photogravure?
Was that? Sure. Go ahead. You got about maybe 5 minutes or so?
Oh yeah, less than that.
Okay.
It's a section of the Sunday paper that people actually read. It was almost all photos. 3 times as many people read the rotogravure section as read the rest of the paper. Papers at that time were a luxury, yet people were throwing out 3/4 of the paper unread. There were hardly, and this is related to the story as we got it. There were hardly any photos in the rest of the paper. There was one of Winan that they ran every issue, but Tui and Dominique and Keating were never in the paper. That's why they didn't know what each other looked like. Okay, and I think I actually got everything in.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Iris. And folks, this has been a wonderful series. So thank you, Rob, Sherri, Maritza, Iris, Joia, Rupali. I mean, it's been amazing. Rupali, what do you think?
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed the series. I often go, every now and then I'll go back to the book and go into this imaginary world of Rourke and Dominique, but doing it this time with all the references was so rich. It was
Wonderful.
really nice.
Joia, any last words?
I think we need to do both the Louis Sullivan and the Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged, because those are both their masterworks. And I feel like we've just been building up to do
Absolutely.
both of those.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Rupali, what do you think? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, Iris, do you like Atlas Shrugged, Iris? Sorry, just you're still on mute.
Yeah. Yes. No, I love Atlas Shrugged.
Okay. No,
I haven't read it in several years, and I haven't read it in this kind of community. So
yeah, no, I really like your almost like childlike joy of rereading Fountainhead. I know you know the book very well, but just rereading it with us. And I really appreciate all the comments that you have brought in, because you brought in a lot of richness and the context of how it was written and just so many different observations. So I'm just delighted that you found us, and thank you again. All right,
Actually,
folks.
I want to go back to what brought me here in the first place, which was the idea of pain that only goes down so far. And, it's still a very important idea to me. And at the beginning, it was the only thing I ever disagreed with Rand about. And now it's become a very important part of my life.
Wow, that was one of the most touching stories that I've ever heard. Thank you very much, Iris. Good night, everybody. Bye.